Everything felt a little too perfect. The weather was flawless, our smiles looked genuine in every photo, and we clinked wine glasses under the sunset like a couple in a magazine. Even running into an old friend seemed like a stroke of luck. But it's in moments like these that something breaks, quietly, without sound. I never intended to become a detective in my own marriage. But the second I heard that voice outside our hotel room, I knew, this wasn't about love anymore. This was about the truth. And the truth doesn't stay buried forever. We were 25 years in, 25 years of marriage, life, routines, and all the in-between messes you learn to navigate like second nature. That's a quarter century of shared bank statements, burnt toast on Sundays, inside jokes about annoying coworkers, and memorizing the way she liked her tea depending on the season. So when we packed our bags and took off for that resort in the Keys to celebrate our anniversary, I genuinely thought this was a high point. A kind of victory lap. Rachel and I had been through the ringer in earlier years, like any couple worth their salt. Job losses. Her mother's endless surgeries. A teenage daughter who once dyed the cat pink. But here we were, older, supposedly wiser, and finally relaxing under a palm tree with overpriced drinks garnished with fruit that no adult man should be seen sipping in public. I let it slide. After all, I wasn't there to maintain appearances, I was there to breathe. To laugh. To remember why I married her in the first place. And I did. For the first few days, anyway. Rachel wore this big floppy hat that made her look like a tourist from a 1970s travel ad, and she'd laugh like she did back in our 20s when I'd whisper absurdities in her ear during buffet breakfasts. We took long walks along the pier and she actually held my hand like she used to before work and motherhood and cholesterol meds started eating away at spontaneity. She even danced with me one night to a steel drum band, which I'm fairly certain is a minor miracle given she claims anything with rhythm hurts her hips now. But the real kicker, what made the whole trip feel dipped in nostalgia and sprinkled with divine timing, was running into my buddy Mike and his wife Sarah. I hadn't seen Mike in almost 8 years. He used to be my fishing partner back when we'd escaped the suburbs on early Saturday mornings like fugitives of fatherhood. Mike and I used to talk about life in the way only two men on a boat with lukewarm beer and a stubborn catch can. We'd watch the fog roll off the lake, swap absurd theories about the best bait, and sometimes just sit in silence, comfortable, peaceful. So to find him at the same resort, sipping a gin and tonic in the hotel bar like no time had passed, well, that was a bonus I didn't know I needed. Rachel was surprised, in that pleasant way wives are when they see their husband actually light up like a kid seeing an old friend. She and Sarah caught up quickly too, reminiscing about that weekend cabin trip we all took where the pipes froze and we had to use wine to brush our teeth. Rachel and I ended up spending almost every day of that trip with Mike and Sarah. We had dinners together, laughed till we cried over stupid card games by the pool, and best of all, Mike and I went fishing again, just the two of us. I remember that morning like it was a snapshot. The sun hadn't fully breached the edge of the water, casting this dull orange haze over everything, and the boat was bobbing so gently I forgot I ever had back pain. Mike handed me a coffee in a thermos that smelled suspiciously like whiskey and said, "Man, 25 years, huh?" I nodded, eyes fixed on the horizon, and said, "Yeah. Can you believe she's still putting up with me?" He chuckled and replied, "Rachel's a saint. But you're not that bad. You still snore." I laughed because it was true and because it felt good to be seen by someone who remembered who you were before the years softened your edges. That morning was perfect. The fish weren't biting for anything, but it didn't matter. We talked about our kids, our regrets, our dreams we'd quietly retired and the few we still held onto like dusty souvenirs. Mike told me about how his son had just proposed to his girlfriend and how Sarah was already planning a wedding before the ring even got sized. I told him about my daughter's new job in Denver, how proud Rachel was, and how weird it was not seeing her cereal bowls stacked in the sink every morning. We were two men doing what men do best, talking without making it feel like a therapy session. We didn't hug or get sentimental when we headed back. Just a slap on the back, a good morning on the water, and a promise to do it again soon. But if I'd known what was coming, if I'd had even a sliver of intuition about the mess unraveling beneath the surface of our carefully staged vacation, I might have held that moment longer. I might have asked one more question. Paid more attention to the tone behind Rachel's laugh or the way she kept checking her phone when she thought I wasn't looking. But hindsight is a cruel, smug little thing, always waving its arms after you've already walked past the fire. Because for all the jokes and fishing and sunburn joy, that trip, the one that started like a romantic reboot of our marriage, was also the one where something inside me began to itch. Something I wouldn't acknowledge just yet. Not when everything still looked perfect on the outside. But deep down, a voice I hadn't heard in a long time was starting to whisper. And once that whisper started, it wouldn't stop. The next morning, I left the room just after sunrise. The air was clean in that way you only get near the ocean, full of salt and possibility. Rachel was still lounging in bed, her hair splayed over the pillow like a magazine spread. When I asked if she wanted to join me for a walk, she yawned and said with a half-smile, "You're the one with the headache, not me." I chuckled, assuming it was a dig at the wine from the night before, not reading too deep into her tone. It didn't seem cold or dismissive. If anything, she looked amused, still wrapped in hotel linens like some vacation queen. I kissed her forehead and went out, barefoot in sandals, taking the side stairs down instead of the elevator. I liked the quiet. The resort was waking up slow, the pool crew spraying down the tiles, a few early birds grabbing lounge chairs to claim territory for later. I walked along the beach path for maybe 40 minutes, listening to the shuffle of waves and watching seagulls dive at scraps left by the night crew. I thought about how fortunate I was, not in a loud, flashy way, but in the quiet, stable kind that most people overlook. 25 years with Rachel hadn't been without its bumps, but we had made it through. She still laughed at my bad jokes, still knew how I liked my coffee, still reached for my hand under the table at restaurants. That had to count for something. And this trip, it was meant to be more than just a celebration. It was a reminder that we were still us, despite time, despite life. When I looped back around, I decided to take the stairs again. It was one of those concrete staircases tucked off the side, where your footsteps echo and the light flickers like an old-school horror flick. As I climbed the second flight, I heard voices drifting down. At first I didn't think much of it, resorts are full of murmurs. But then one word cut through the din, clear as a bell. Adventure. And I recognized the voice that said it. Mike. It was Mike. My friend, my fishing partner, standing outside my hotel room, saying the word like it was a shared secret. I slowed my steps without even realizing it. He was talking in that low, eager tone I'd heard him use when we were kids trying to talk our way into places we didn't belong. He said something about how good it had been. That's what he said. You remember how good we were? The danger of being caught, the thrill of it all. I heard Rachel's voice next, more clipped, trying to hush him. Not now, she said, or something close to it. I couldn't catch every word because the wind shifted. But it was enough. He wanted something to happen again. Something that had happened before. She didn't sound flattered, just irritated, like someone trying to swat away a memory that wouldn't stay buried. I stood on the stairwell, one hand on the metal railing, staring at the wall like it would offer me answers. My stomach dropped, not all at once, but in stages, the way you realize your keys are missing right before a flight. I waited there, maybe 30 seconds, maybe a full minute, letting them have their finish. Then I made sure my footsteps were loud as I climbed the rest of the stairs. When I turned the corner into the hallway, Mike was walking away with a forced casual stride, one that looked borrowed from a man trying too hard not to be suspicious. He passed me with a grin that felt 2 seconds delayed, and I returned it without flinching. Rachel opened the door as I approached. Her expression was smooth, too smooth. Like she'd just practiced it in the mirror. "Hey," she said. "You were gone a while." I nodded and stepped inside. She went back to the mirror, brushing her hair, avoiding my eyes. I walked in behind her like nothing had happened. Like I hadn't just caught the edges of a conversation I wasn't meant to hear. I didn't mention Mike. I didn't mention anything. Not yet. Because the moment was still assembling itself in my mind. The pieces weren't all there, but they were starting to take shape. I needed more. I needed to be sure. So I played the part of the doting husband. I asked her if she wanted breakfast downstairs or room service. I joked about how the seagulls had better beach etiquette than some tourists. She laughed, a little too easily. But I didn't press. Not that day. That day, I just watched. I filed the scene away with quiet precision. A voice outside a door. Familiar words used in unfamiliar ways. A look that lingered half a second too long. And now, something had shifted. Maybe small, but not subtle. Like a painting that had been slightly moved, barely off-center, but enough that once you notice it, you can't stop noticing it. Something was wrong. I didn't know how deep it ran. I didn't know what it meant yet. But I knew this, the conversation I wasn't supposed to hear was just the beginning. This evening, Mike suggested dinner, something about the place being rated high for its ribs and the sauce being homemade with some secret family recipe going back 3 generations. He sold it with that same charm he always had, easy and effortless, like the world was one long inside joke he was always in on. Rachel was quick to agree, saying she was in the mood for something casual, something loud and lively. So we all went, me, Rachel, Mike, and Sarah, to a barbecue spot about a 15-minute walk from the resort, down one of those touristy streets lined with surf shops, live music, and overpriced souvenir stands. The restaurant had picnic-style tables, strings of soft yellow lights hanging overhead, and a kind of menu where every item came with coleslaw whether you asked for it or not. We got seated near the back, closer to the smoker where the air was heavy with hickory and anticipation. The place was crowded, the tables full, the music a low hum of blues guitar from a man with a long beard and a broken amplifier. We ordered pitchers of sweet tea and platters big enough to feed small families. Ribs, pulled pork, cornbread, beans with chunks of brisket stirred in, and fried pickles that were better than they had any right to be. The food came fast, the drinks never stopped, and for a few hours, everything felt normal. Easy. Familiar. Mike was in full storyteller mode, regaling Sarah with a half-true tale about the time he and I tried to fish in a thunderstorm and ended up soaked to our socks with a tackle box full of water. Rachel laughed loud, head tilted back, her eyes shining the way they used to when we were young and broke and thought pizza night was a luxury. I watched her from across the table, searching her face for something I couldn't quite define, something I hoped wasn't there. But there was nothing. No flicker of discomfort. No secret glance toward Mike. No signs at all. She was just Rachel, and Mike was just Mike, acting like old friends on a vacation, laughing too loud and asking the waiter for extra napkins like it was their job. Even Sarah was relaxed, chiming in with her dry one-liners, wiping sauce from her cheek, sipping her drink like she didn't have a care in the world. The whole scene had the kind of gloss that made you wonder if you'd imagined any cracks in the first place. When dessert came, banana pudding with crushed cookies on top, Sarah leaned over and asked me if I liked it sweet or traditional. I told her it didn't matter as long as it wasn't runny, and she smiled in that polite, neutral way that wives of friends do when they're trying to be warm but not too warm. The check came, Mike insisted on splitting it down the middle, and we all headed back slowly, half from the weight of the food and half from the weight of the evening. The street was less crowded now, the music softer, the air thicker with night. Rachel was on my left, her arm brushing mine, her steps light. She commented on how pretty the lights were, how we should take a picture by the old mural near the pier before we left town. Mike and Sarah walked ahead, not too far, but just enough to give the illusion of space. As we reached the resort lobby, everyone said goodnight, and we all started to head off to our respective rooms. That's when Sarah turned slightly and pressed a small, folded square of paper into my hand with the kind of precision that said she'd been waiting for the right moment. I took it without reaction, gave her a nod that could have meant anything, and slipped it into my pocket like it was a receipt I meant to throw away. Rachel didn't notice, or if she did, she gave no sign. Back in the room, she kicked off her sandals and went into the bathroom, humming to herself as she washed off her makeup. I said I needed a minute, stepped into the other bathroom near the entry, and locked the door behind me. My hands weren't shaking, but they weren't exactly steady either. I pulled the note from my pocket, unfolded it slowly, careful not to tear the crease. It was plain hotel stationery, the kind they keep in drawers next to a Bible no one reads. The handwriting was tight, neat, controlled. It read, "Midnight by your car, I can't keep quiet anymore." Just that. No name. No explanation. No greeting. I stared at it for a long time, like the ink might rearrange itself into something else, something less loaded. Midnight. That gave me just under 2 hours. I slipped the note into the inside flap of my wallet and flushed the toilet to keep the illusion intact. When I stepped out, Rachel was in bed, half buried in white sheets, flipping channels like she cared what was on. I smiled, said something about how full I still was, and got in beside her. I didn't look at her face. I just watched the screen and listened to the sound of her breathing, even in calm, like someone without a single secret in the world. It was nearly midnight when I looked over at the digital clock on the nightstand, its red numbers glowing like an ember in the dark. Rachel was asleep beside me, breathing slow and steady, her back turned. She had dozed off sometime after the third rerun of an old crime show, mumbling something about how tired she was, and I had just nodded, pretending to doze too. But I hadn't closed my eyes once. That note was burning a hole in my thoughts, scratching at the back of my mind like a restless wind. I moved quietly, slipping out from under the covers with practiced ease, not even rustling the sheets enough to make her shift. I got dressed in the dark, grabbed my phone, and stepped out into the hallway without a sound. The hotel was mostly silent, save for the distant hum of the ice machine and a soft thud from some late-night room service delivery cart. I took the back staircase down and exited through the parking lot door, walking slowly toward where our car was parked under a crooked palm tree near the edge of the lot. The air was still warm, but the kind of warm that clung instead of comforted. I spotted Sarah before she saw me. She was pacing a few feet from the curb, arms crossed tightly, her foot tapping in small agitated bursts. Her hair was pinned up but strands had come loose, sticking to her neck, and the look on her face was not one of someone who'd just come for a friendly midnight chat. As I got closer, I could tell something was off, not just nerves, but something deeper, something jagged under the surface. I asked her if everything was all right, and she just stared at me for a moment before shaking her head like she was trying to find the right place to start. She said she hadn't meant to say anything. Not after all these years. She said it had happened once, years ago, back when the four of us had dinner at her place during one of those double-date weekends. She had gone back inside after forgetting a dish towel and caught Mike and Rachel in the hallway, close, too close, caught mid-whisper, hands on each other, guilty expressions frozen like statues. Sarah told me she didn't confront them that night. Instead, she waited. And later, Mike convinced her it was a misunderstanding, said Rachel had tripped and he'd just caught her. She knew it sounded ridiculous, even then. But he'd sworn nothing happened. He cried. He begged. And she loved him enough to want to believe it, to hold her marriage together. So she chose silence, and Mike made her promise not to mention it ever again. But recently, on this trip, she had seen the signs again. She saw the glances, the way they leaned toward each other, the quiet disappearances during group outings, the text messages Mike would glance at then quickly stash his phone away. She noticed Rachel slipping out to take phone calls, coming back with that flustered look she always got when she lied about something small, thinking no one was paying attention. Then Sarah stopped speaking and looked at me with a kind of fragile hesitation. I told her what I'd heard. I described the voices outside the room, how Mike had said something about how good it had been, the thrill, the danger, and how Rachel had tried to dismiss him, whispering like a nervous teenager behind a locker. I admitted I hadn't said anything in the moment, hadn't wanted to believe what I was hearing. Her face twisted as I spoke, her hands gripping her elbows, and then it was like a dam broke. She started crying, quiet at first, but then her shoulders shook and she pressed her hand to her mouth like she was trying to shove the pain back down. I stood there watching her crumble in front of a car we'd both probably driven to 100 family events, and I realized this wasn't just about betrayal. This was about how long someone could pretend something wasn't broken before it finally cut them open. She kept saying she had been stupid, that she should have known, that people don't just stop being who they are because time passes. I told her this wasn't her fault, and it wasn't mine either. But it was clear we weren't just two bystanders anymore. We were involved. We were the ones who had been left to carry the weight of other people's secrets. And we both knew this couldn't be allowed to go on. She looked at me through the tears and said she couldn't let them keep doing this, walking around like they were innocent, like nothing had happened. I nodded, and we stood there for a moment in silence, two hurt people on the edge of a revelation, both staring at the mess that had quietly built itself up around us for years. We decided, right then, that something had to be done. Not a screaming match. Not a dramatic confrontation in the hotel lobby. No, it had to be something they'd remember. Something sharp but quiet. Something that would leave no room for denial. A lesson. Not for revenge, but for truth. And as we walked back toward our rooms, one after the other like ghosts returning to their own unfinished business, I realized that the truth doesn't always shout. Sometimes it just waits, patient and still, until the exact moment when someone stops looking away. The next morning, we put the plan into motion with the kind of precision that only comes when pain has stripped away hesitation. I told Rachel I had to head into the city for work-related documents that were too sensitive to email, claimed it was urgent, that the firm needed me to sign and notarize a package that couldn't wait. She barely blinked, just nodded with mild concern and said to call her if it got complicated. Sarah, meanwhile, said she absolutely couldn't miss the scenic tour that was included in their resort package, all smiles and forced cheer, even though we both knew it was a setup. She knew Mike wouldn't go, he hated those things, always said they were tourist traps for people who couldn't read a map. As we walked out, we each left behind something small but crucial, a tiny microphone hidden in plain sight. Mine was tucked into a potted plant near the dresser in our room, a little gadget that had cost less than $20 online but now felt like it had the power of a courtroom wiretap. Sarah placed hers behind the alarm clock, wedging it between the back panel and the wall socket. They were voice-activated, discreet, and surprisingly clear for something that had come in packaging with cartoon animals on the instructions. I guess AliExpress finally earned its place in my life. We didn't go far, just out to a nearby coffee shop where we could sit with our backs to the window and our ears tuned to the audio feeds coming in through our phones. For a while, there was nothing but the hum of air conditioning and the occasional shuffle of footsteps. Then, about 15 minutes in, the signal from Sarah's room spiked. There was a knock. A pause. And then his voice, Mike's, came through low and unmistakable. One line. That's all it took. How long I've been waiting for this. No hesitation, no nervousness, just that sickening note of satisfaction that made my jaw clench. We were on our feet before the sentence even ended, sprinting back across the property like something had ignited under us. We reached the elevators, but it was too slow, so we took the stairs, 3 floors up, lungs burning, hearts pounding, not from exertion but from the weight of truth finally crashing down. I reached the door first, Sarah right behind me, and with a twist of the spare key card she'd swiped earlier, we were inside. There was no need to search. It was obvious. There they were. Rachel and Mike, tangled in sheets, startled like thieves caught red-handed, faces frozen in that moment where lies no longer help. Sarah gasped, a broken sound, then covered her mouth and bolted. I heard her voice trail behind her, saying she'd come back for her things later, that she couldn't breathe, couldn't stand it. I stood there, not moving, just watching as the last of my patients died a clean, quick death. I told Mike to get out. No yelling. No dramatics. Just a flat order like a boss dismissing an employee who'd stolen from the company fridge. He looked at me, eyes wide, then dropped his head and fumbled for his clothes. Rachel sat up, clutching the sheet like it offered dignity, and started to say something, but I cut her off before she got a full word out. I told her I knew this was going to happen, that the moment I heard his voice outside our door days ago, I started preparing. I told her I'd already contacted my lawyer and sent all the evidence, including the audio, from the microphone to him. She wouldn't be able to argue her way into anything more than what the law minimally allowed. And thanks to our prenup, the only thing she'd walk away with was the car. Not the house. Not the savings. Not the pension. Just 4 wheels and a dented rear bumper. I'd also sent the recordings and a detailed account to her parents, who already barely tolerated me but had made it clear over the years that they liked her even less. Their disappointment in her had been simmering under the surface for decades, and now they had the reason they'd been waiting for. I also sent the information to a few close friends, the ones who thought we were the perfect couple, so they'd hear it from me instead of some twisted version she might cook up later. Rachel didn't say anything. Not another word. Just sat there, staring at me like a stranger who'd mistaken me for someone else. I left the room first. Mike was gone by then, probably hiding in a maintenance stairwell, too ashamed to walk out through the lobby. Sarah had already packed up and was waiting by the car, eyes red but posture straight. We didn't say much. We didn't need to. By the next morning, I was on a flight home, alone. She never tried to call. Never texted. I never saw Rachel again. And honestly, that was the easiest part to accept.